Nathan Turner stood several steps away from his parents, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his designer jacket, his jaw tight with irritation. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace and the history surrounding it meant nothing to him. All he could think about was how much he didn't want to be there. "This is ridiculous," Nathan muttered under his breath. "What was that?" his mother, Margaret, asked, turning toward him. Her voice was soft and tired, like someone trying too hard to keep the peace. Nathan rolled his eyes. "I said this is ridiculous. We don't belong here. Actually, you don't belong here. Just look at you two." His words cut sharper than he intended, but he didn't bother to soften them. His father, Charles, stiffened but said nothing. He simply adjusted the sleeves of his old tweed jacket, the same one Nathan had seen him wear for years. The fabric had started to fray at the cuffs, and the buttons barely held on. His mother's coat wasn't much better, faded at the seams, outdated in style, and completely out of place compared to the fashionable tourists surrounding them. Margaret lowered her gaze, brushing imaginary dust off her coat. "We thought it would be nice to spend some time together, to see something beautiful." "Beautiful?" Nathan scoffed. "What's beautiful about reminding ourselves how far we've fallen?" Charles finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough, Nathan." "No, it's not enough," Nathan snapped, his voice rising. A few tourists turned to look, and his mother shifted uncomfortably under their stares. "You drag me here like this is some kind of family outing when all I can think about is how embarrassing it is to be seen with you." Margaret flinched, her eyes glistening. Charles took a step closer to Nathan, his jaw tightening. "Watch your tone." "Or what?" Nathan said bitterly. "You'll ground me? Cut my allowance?" "Oh, wait. You already did that when you lost everything." His words hung heavy in the air, sharp and cutting. His parents exchanged a look, one Nathan couldn't quite read. Guilt, sadness, disappointment. He didn't care. To him, they deserved it. A few years ago, Nathan had lived in luxury, private schools, fancy vacations, and closets filled with designer clothes. His parents had run a successful business until it all fell apart. Poor investments, bad partnerships, and a market crash wiped out their savings overnight. The house was sold, the cars were gone, and Nathan's perfect, shiny life came crashing down with it. Now they lived in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of London. His father worked long hours at a factory, and his mother took shifts as a cashier to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Nathan was forced to take public transport and shop at discount stores, surrounded by people he used to look down on. And here they were, standing in front of Buckingham Palace, pretending nothing had changed, pretending they were still the family they used to be. A slight movement caught Nathan's attention. One of the royal guards stationed near the gate, the one directly facing them, shifted his stance ever so slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Nathan noticed it. The guard's red uniform was spotless, his black bearskin hat towering over his head. He gripped his rifle with precise form, his expression unreadable. Nathan glared at him. "What are you looking at?" he muttered under his breath, his anger now bleeding into irritation. Margaret pulled at his sleeve. "Nathan, stop." But Nathan wasn't done. What's he even doing here? Standing there like a statue while the rest of us have to figure out how to survive in the real world. Charles's voice was low but firm. "That's enough, Nathan." "Why?" "He's not going to move. He's just a glorified mannequin." Margaret stepped between them, whispering, "Please stop it. People are staring." And they were. The tourists nearby were no longer pretending not to notice the family's argument. Some looked uncomfortable. Others were outright amused. But Nathan didn't stop, not until he noticed the guard move again. This time, the shift was more obvious. The guard, whose nameplate read Corporal James Callahan, adjusted his grip on the rifle. It wasn't much, but it felt deliberate, like a silent warning. Nathan froze. Was the guard watching him? No, he couldn't be. The guards weren't supposed to move or speak unless there was an emergency. Still, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that Corporal Callahan's gaze was fixed directly on him. And for the first time since the argument started, unease began to creep into his chest. Nathan stepped back, suddenly feeling exposed. His parents noticed the shift in his demeanor but said nothing, clearly relieved that he had stopped yelling. Margaret placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. We didn't bring you here to upset you. We thought it might remind you that life goes on, that we can rebuild. Rebuild? Nathan scoffed, though his voice was quieter now. You don't build palaces on broken foundations. Charles sighed. That's not true. Every legacy has its struggles. Even the royal family faced hardships. But they endured, and so will we. Nathan didn't respond. He wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked back at the royal guard, who had returned to his stillness but whose presence now felt heavier, almost watchful. He turned away and walked a few steps, trying to shake the unease. He hated how unsettled he felt, how his emotions were spiraling out of control. Corporal James Callahan hadn't moved since their brief moment of eye contact, but something about him felt unsettling. It wasn't just his stillness. It was the way he looked at Nathan, like he could see straight through the bravado Nathan wore like armor. Nathan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He hated that feeling, the feeling of being small. His parents walked ahead in silence, Margaret's shoulders hunched, and Charles looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his back. The image made Nathan's frustration bubble up all over again. Why are we even here? He muttered under his breath. Margaret turned, her face tight with worry. Can I just what? Nathan snapped, cutting her off. Pretend we're still who we used to be? Pretend you didn't ruin everything? Charles finally turned around, his voice sharp. Watch your tone. No, Nathan shot back. I won't. I'm sick of pretending like this is fine. Margaret flinched, and Charles's jaw tightened. But Nathan kept going. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to stare, whispering as they glanced at the family. Nathan saw phones raised, people recording. But instead of backing down, his frustration boiled over. Everyone here probably thinks we're nobodies because that's exactly what we are now. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes. Charles's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he didn't say a word either. And then the royal guard moved once again. It started with a single, deliberate step forward. The sharp clack of Corporal James Callahan's boots against the stone pavement cut through the air, snapping everyone's attention toward him. Nathan froze. He took another step, closing the distance between them, his rifle held firmly at his side. The crowd fell silent. The tourists who had been snapping pictures moments earlier now stared, their cameras hanging uselessly in their hands. Nathan swallowed hard. His voice, so loud just seconds ago, suddenly felt like it had been stolen from him.